great-grandpa is an artist, and he's here to talk about it.
That's right.
Awesome.
Thank you, Leo. Yeah, so my name is Nick Collias, and Leo Collias is my son, and my grandfather was named John Collias. He was a working artist in Boise for like 60 or 70 years. So if you look over here, you can see this is his art studio, and when I was your guys' age, I spent a ton of time hanging out with him in his art studio, just watching him paint, watching him make stuff. And an art studio, I can tell you, if you like to make messes and don't like to clean them up, an art studio is a great thing to have. So you should absolutely have one. One sec, I'm almost there.
Well, yeah, you guys can wait. I'll bet there's gonna be
I'll
some
ask you plenty of questions. Don't worry.
So hold on a
But
second.
I wanted to ask some of you guys. So his job was an artist. I know you guys have been talking about artists a lot. Some really famous artists. And he was not a famous artist. He was just a guy in town who did art for a job. And I want to know, do any of you know anybody who their job is being an artist?
I forgot his name.
Okay, yeah.
Lisa Butler.
Lisa Butler, sure. You guys have been learning about some really famous artists. Anybody else? Sure. What about like a writer or somebody who makes videos? Those are all jobs too, right? They're not just things that people do to be famous.
Oh,
It's a lot of hands. You guys really are pretty active.
hey.
All right, let's keep moving. So I want to talk about a couple of things, right? So first of all, what does it really mean to be an artist as your job? Like, we don't think about art necessarily as something that's a job. It's something we do because we love it, especially when we're kids, right? And I also want to talk about where artists get their ideas, and also where there's art all around us right now in our lives that we don't even think that somebody created, or maybe we don't even realize that it's art, because it's really easy to go to like a museum and look at something on a wall with a bunch of lights around it and a little card that tells you what it is and think, okay, that's art. But there's other kinds of art too, and that's the sort of thing that working artists sometimes make. So.
I got an answer for all three.
Oh yeah?
Can you read them?
let's wait. We're gonna revisit it. I like that.
Should I do this one?
Just keep it in your head
Let's
for right
keep
now.
it in your head for now. So one thing that you may not realize it can mean to be a working artist is it means sometimes you have to fake it until you make it. You guys ever heard that saying before? What does that mean?
It means like fake something until you like know what you're gonna make and then you make it.
Yeah. It means like you do something before you even really are an official something. So for John Collias, my grandfather, in 1942 and 1943, he came to Boise from his hometown in Indiana and was a soldier out at the airport during World War II. And him and his brother, they had both spent their whole lives drawing. They were really, really good. They would go to the movies and they would just draw what they would see on screen. They would do portraits of each other. Like, they were way better before this than I ever will be. But they weren't really painters. Nobody ever paid them for anything. So they went to the army base, and the boss said, "So what do you guys do?" And they said, "Oh, we're painters. We're artists. That's what we do." And he said, "Great, because we have some cans over here that need to be painted so that people can put their cigarettes in them when they're done with them." And that was the kind of painting that they needed to do.
I don't like smoking.
Yeah.
I don't like people who smoke.
So that was when they said that we're painters. That's the first thing they did. And their second job was to paint a wall black. There was a big wall that was painted yellow, and they wanted it painted black. And they said, "Hey, you guys, you're painters. We want you to go paint that wall over there." And that was their second job. And they did it. But then, once kind of people realized, hey, these guys, they'll do something if we tell them to do it, the base commander said, we have this base newspaper. It'd probably be cooler if we had some cartoons and stuff in it, right? So they said, "You guys know how to make cartoons?" And they said, "Oh, yeah, absolutely." And so my grandfather, he said, "Well, draw a cartoon." And he drew a cartoon on the spot. And they put it in the newspaper, and so they started doing that. So this was one of his first cartoons in the newspaper. It says, "Note to those at home, no letter again today." It's not a funny cartoon. It's kind of a sad cartoon. What do you guys think that means? Note to those at home, no letter again today. What do you think?
I think it means that well, there's not gonna be another letter.
Yeah.
There's only one letter.
That guy on the right, he wants a letter. He wants his family to write to him while he's away being a soldier. And they're just trying to remind everybody, hey, write to people who are away serving their country. Right, exactly. So maybe, hopefully tomorrow there will be. And then they made a lot more cartoons. Some of them are war cartoons like this, which are political cartoons. So that guy in the middle is Uncle Sam, who's supposed to be the United States. And then the guy on the left is Joseph Stalin, who's supposed to represent Russia, who was an ally of the United States in World War II. And then the guy on the right is Great Britain. And then they have this guy here, Hitler, who's supposed to represent Germany in a pair of pliers down there.
I don't like Hitler. He started the war.
Exactly. So this is a political cartoon about how they're going to defeat Germany and Italy.
Oh God.
So they made a lot of these cartoons.
Hitler was like the boss of Nazi Germany, right?
Mm-hmm, exactly. Yeah. And then they transitioned from not just making cartoons to making profiles of soldiers. This guy is the base commander, and they would draw these in the newspaper out there, and it's really cool, right? Like for somebody who's never gone to art school or anything, they definitely knew what they were doing. They did like 30 or 40 of these where they would just pick a soldier and draw him or her and draw the things that they like to do the most and put it in the newspaper like once a week. And what they started to realize was if you just can make art and you're willing to do it, people really, really like it. And so when my grandfather wanted to buy candy or something like that when he was a soldier, he would do portraits of people on the spot in like 45 seconds or a minute and sell them to them for a few bucks so that he could go buy candy.
Because he had a huge sweet tooth.
Candy and probably cigarettes because people smoked a lot more back then, especially soldiers.
Yeah, he had the biggest sweet tooth.
But then not just cartoons, once they figured out, hey, this guy knows what he's doing, he made posters too, which the Army started using for air bases all over the world. This one says, why shoot at me? Know your aircraft. Any ideas what it's trying to tell you? What do you think?
Like, why shoot at me? Shoot your aircraft.
Yes, yeah, so when airplanes are flying around up there, it's really easy to you see one in front of you and you shoot at it. But they're saying, whoa, 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 be careful. Don't shoot the wrong people up in the air. Try to know your aircraft.
Yeah.
And so he made this poster in Boise, and they published it and put it in bases all around the world just to remind people, like, be careful when you're flying around up there. Don't crash into somebody. Don't shoot at the wrong person.
That's on your team.
Mm-hmm, exactly. As I mentioned, he also just really liked to make artwork and give it to people as gifts or give it to people to make money. So when he met this pretty lady that he thought was really nice, he made a portrait of her as a gift for her family. And they thought, you know what, okay, I kind of like this guy. He's really nice. And then they started dating, and that was my grandmother, who wrote him letters all during the war, and he would send her home artwork in the letters sometimes too. But he still wasn't a working artist. Even after the war was over, like, you can see how good he was. Maybe he could have just kind of gone to work and thought, I'm going to be an artist. But instead, what he decided to do was to keep practicing, keep learning. And after the war, he went to art school because he wanted to be an illustrator. An illustrator back then, there were tons of magazines, like adventure magazines, and also books that had hand-painted illustrations in them. Those are what young people in particular really wanted to read, and he grew up reading those and really idolizing those artists, and so he decided that's what he wanted to do. So he went to an art school in Chicago, and they would do all kinds of things where people would dress up in costumes and sit there for like half an hour, and they'd make these really intricate paintings and drawings of them. But another thing that they did, which I know you guys have done, are faster things like quick sketches. So I have like 8 or 10 books of his that are nothing more than thousands of sketches that he did in 45 seconds. Have you guys done some quick sketches?
Yeah.
In your art? Yeah?
It's like 30.
On eyes? Oh, okay. That's good. That's a good specialty to have. So after he got out of art school, the only problem was in the 1950s, everybody wanted to be an illustrator. So even if he was good enough to draw these things, doesn't mean that you could get work doing it. So he thought, you know what? I'm going to make some advertisements instead. Everybody wants ads. You could do billboards. You could have them in a magazine. And so this one, there's 2 people, but there's not the thing, right? The thing that it's advertising isn't in there. What do you guys think this is an ad for?
Marriage.
Marriage, huh? Okay, just telling you to get married. That's an interesting idea. Maybe, what about a thing? What sort of a thing would they be trying to sell? A ring, right? Look, she's looking at her finger. I bet there's a ring there.
Yeah.
Or some kind of jewelry, yeah. What about this one?
Orange
Juice or beer. Yeah, he looks happy. He also, as Leo pointed out, he also looks like he's going to pour that just right down the front of his shirt. Or just like. What about these? A book, maybe? Yeah.
That's hilarious.
I think that these aren't really advertisements for anything in particular. They're just like you could put anything underneath them because these people are so happy. Whatever they're trying to sell you, you'll be that happy when you buy it. It's hard to imagine being as happy as these people.
Girlfriend to sell a
But guess what? Nobody bought his illustrations either. For 10 years. He didn't get any work as an artist, and what he did was he worked in a factory making vacuum cleaners and blenders.
What?
Yeah, because he had to do something for work, and it's really easy when those sorts of things happen in your life to think, all right, you know what? I'm not an artist. I'm just a guy. I'm just going to have a normal job. But he kind of always still wanted to be an artist, and he always thought he was an artist, even when he was making blenders. So he would go home at night after a long day working in a factory in Chicago, and he would do portraits of his family just to hang on the wall in the house. This is my Uncle George. This guy in the middle is my dad when he was about Leo's age, maybe. And that's my Uncle Steve on the right. And there's a bunch of those. He did portraits of his wife. Because he was dressing him up like a cowboy. That was his favorite cowboy suit. And I think my grandfather just saw him and said, hey, go sit in that chair for a little while. And he went and sat there in the chair for a little while. And he did that in like an hour or two.
Oh,
Yeah, because he went to that school where they really taught them how to do things quickly, right? Like you can take years and years to do a painting. And you guys talked about Leonardo da Vinci. He took years to do some of the things that he did, but he also had lots and lots of notebooks where he did things that were just an hour or two or even less. And he also practiced on himself.
what?
That's how he's painting himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you guys have done some self-portraits, right? I see some self-portraits over there. And then I saw in the hallway last week that you guys all did self-portraits too, right?
He did a mirror, but we used a mirror to do it.
This is you can see that there's a mirror that he's looking at himself in, and he's just standing there going like this. So what do you think? Do you think it's easier or harder to draw yourself than it is to draw somebody else? Harder. Why is it harder? Okay, I haven't heard from you. Why do you think it's harder?
Because it's hard because you can't just look at yourself. You don't have like two sets of you have two sets of eyes,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't go in different directions.
No, you're exactly right. I think it's a lot harder. It's hard to, because if he's doing this and he wants to paint the back of the easel over here, he's not really looking at himself, and he's moving constantly, right? So it's got to be really hard. And it's also kind of funny that he chose that hat. I think it's kind of a funny looking hat. So then after 10 years of working in factories, he said, you know what? I'm going to go back to Boise. That's where my wife is from, and we're going to try it there. Maybe it'll be easier for me to actually be a real working artist as a job in Boise. And he started going around town and asking everybody, hey, is there any artwork? And he ran into a guy from the newspaper who he knew from back when he was working in the newspaper in World War II. And he said, yeah, absolutely. Come down. We'll figure out something for you to do. And so for a long time, that's what he did was whatever needed to be done. He just said, you know what? I'm willing to make art. I'm willing to make whatever kind of art needs to be made. One of the first things he did was an illustrated newscast in the newspaper. So I know you guys have probably seen the news on TV before.
No.
No? Good. You're lucky to not have seen the news on TV. So back then,
It's really fun.
back then, TV was pretty much brand new, and there wasn't much TV. There was a little bit of radio, a lot of radio. And so sometimes they would do illustrated newscasts in the newspaper. This was in the Idaho Evening Statesman. So back in the 50s, there were 2 newspapers a day that came out. And they would put this in the evening one, and you can see that it covers all the same things that they talk about in the news. There's like guys playing basketball, there's a play over here. They're saying, hey, mail your Christmas packages. Here's something about the biggest shoe in Boise, a size 18 shoe. And then up here in the right, there's a guy who's a waiter in a local restaurant, and he wanted to do a little illustration of. And all of this handwriting, all the things that you might have to type, he did that all by hand too. So he would sit there and do all of this, and he did one of these a week for 2 years straight, and that was one of his big jobs.
Whoa. Jeez, that's so much writing.
So people noticed it, and they started to realize, like, oh yeah, we could use some artwork, and it might look better if somebody created something for our event. So he did a lot of posters.
You just put that in there and color
Right?
it.
So this is, look at all those little scribbles in there, right? He always liked to say he was a scribbler. He would just use pen and ink or pencils, and he would draw things like this that would go on posters all over town. He did posters for plays. He did posters for the Drum and Bugle Championships. He would also go to things like sporting events where you think like, oh, they would just have a photographer there, and he would draw the athletes. These are a bunch of high school athletes doing a track and field meet, and he went there and did all of this while he was just watching them perform. And so then they started to realize, you know what? This guy's pretty good at faces, right? You say your specialty was eyes. He was really, really good at doing people's faces, so it looked exactly like them. So in 1963, the Idaho Statesman said, all right, we're going to start doing this thing every single week where we pick a person who just is kind of interesting in town. They might be a really famous person, like this guy on the left who's named Frank Church. He was really famous. He was a senator. Or it might be somebody who's not famous. This woman on the right, Lily Mantakis, was just somebody in the local Greek church who gave some money to some charities, and they wanted to feature her. She's my great aunt also. And they would just do he would do a portrait of that person every single Sunday in the newspaper. It would come out, and then he would give the original one to the person. So everywhere I go in town, whenever I meet somebody of a certain age, they already know who I am because my grandfather did the portrait of their uncle or of them or of their grandmother. He did like 2,000 of these over 30 years, and they're just hanging in people's houses all over town. I guarantee that some of you have seen these before without even realizing it. Oh, you have?
Yeah, at my grandparents' house.
Okay, cool. So yeah, he did this for 30 years every Sunday, and it would just take him a few hours, but I mean, if you look at those, there's so many tiny little lines.
Oh yeah, I see like in the
You kind of see how he would call himself a scribbler, huh?
Look at all those little lines on the.
So those are some of the different things that he did. But as we were kind of just saying, sometimes being a working artist in a town like Boise means doing the same thing over and over again too. Not just doing the portraits, but even making the same illustration multiple times or painting it in different places. So for example, the Boise Public Library in like 1976 wanted a new piece of art just to hang on the wall. And right about that time, they were talking about tearing down this building, which is the old Boise City Hall. And so he went where the building was still standing, and he did a little sketch of it like this. And that sketch was like this big, and it took him like, I don't know, half hour, maybe less. It's just like, he would basically use crayons and charcoal and just charcoal. Right? You can see this is charcoal here, right? Exactly, like James Castle, yeah. And so then he went up to his studio, and he made a bigger version that was about this big, just on a piece of wood. And that's called a study, right? So here's a sketch. Here's a study where he started to work out, like, here's what I want to do in here. But it's not final, right? You can see there's a building there, but it's not really filled in. There's that cable car there, but it's just drawing it. But he started to think, okay, here's what the final version is going to look like. And then he made the final version, which has more color, it has clouds, it has lights, it has a cable car, there's a few people, a fountain. And that one is actually still in the library. If you go into the library and go onto the second floor, like up the stairs, there's this one there, and then there's another drawing there that he did of an old library in town. Yeah?
What library?
I've seen it.
You seen it? I'm glad to hear that.
What library?
The main library, right? The
main
downtown library?
Downtown. Yeah, not the Bound Crossing library. Yep.
Yes.
So then he was a big fan of Boise State, and he taught a little bit at Boise State too when he could. And so in like 1978 or something like that, the head of the athletic department said, you know what? We have this really old logo that nobody likes anymore. Let's make a new logo. John, why don't you show us just an example of what it could look like? So he made this one on the left with just markers, like kid markers. He loved kid markers and all kinds of just normal art supplies, not really fancy stuff, just on a piece of paper. And then he made this, which was the final version that was the logo that was on football helmets and everything for like 30 years after that. So there's a new one. I remember when they switched to the new one. So tell me when you see this, how are the sketch and the final version different? Yeah? How is it different?
On the sketch is like made and his tail are blue.
Yeah, the color's a little bit different. Yeah.
Like the head is tilted down, the other one is tilted up.
Yeah, those are big ones. Yep.
It's more detailed and intricate.
Definitely more detailed. This one is clearly just, you can see where the marker lines are, right? So yeah, a big difference is you mentioned is the head is up, and one reason for that is because if you look where the horse's feet are, they're kind of kicking at northern Idaho, which is where the big rival college, the University of Idaho, is up there. So that's kind of the secret meaning of this that they built into it, is that the horse is kicking the University of Idaho up there because that was the big rival. So once this became the logo, though, it started appearing everywhere. Actually, I was just at Leo's baseball practice yesterday, and one of his coaches had it on his sweatshirt. They still use it. And it was on T-shirts all over the town. That's me in the middle when I was about your guys' age. It's my sisters and my cousins. That's me in the middle. Yeah, we were probably at the house watching a BSU game. You guys have probably watched a BSU game.
No.
Never? Good. But he didn't just make it in places like that. He also, this is the football players' locker room, and he went in and painted it right on the wall. But he even also went and painted it right on the field. That's him with one of the art students out there in like 1981. Just painting it right on the field. But if you guys, has somebody in here ever been to a BSU game in person before? What color is the field?
Blue.
It's blue, right? So this was before the field was blue, and he helped make that decision of like, hey, let's do something unique, let's make it blue. And after they made it blue, he had to go paint it right in the middle again. Yeah.
I have seen a book.
So then, here's another example of doing the same thing over and over again. In 1976, the United States was having its 200th anniversary. And some people in town decided, hey, we're going to take like all the most famous people in Idaho, and we're going to have a big party with all of them. And we want to have like a big painting that has like all of the history of Idaho in it, and we're going to have it behind these people when they have a party. And so they hired my grandfather to do it. And that's all they told him was like, Idaho history, really big. And he said, oh, okay. So he started making little sketches on pieces of paper that were like this big. Like, there's a sketch of a sheep, there's a gold miner, there's a Native American on a pony, here's an eagle, and he started just writing things down like, what's Idaho, what's really memorable at Idaho? There's land, mountains, water and rivers and timber. Potatoes, farming, Shoshone Falls. And then he started to make a slightly bigger study, like we saw before, the study. This one's like 10 inches by about 3 feet, right? And you can see, okay, it's starting to come together. There's mountains, there's a waterfall, here's a Native American again, here's a farm over here. I think there's like an astronaut over there. And so then he took that and got some big panels and finally made this, which is 10 feet by 35 feet, which is like almost as big as this entire wall, basically. It's a mural, exactly. So you can see these lines in it because you can't really make this on a single piece of canvas. He did 7 canvases that were 5 feet by 10 feet.
Yeah, I just saw that.
Here, we'll look a little closer at it.
Excuse me. I have a question.
So, tell me something that you see on here. Yeah? Yeah, there's that sheep again from the study, right? Here's a farmer, Native American. Yeah, what do you see?
I see water.
Yep, there's water. Anybody ever been to Shoshone Falls before?
Oh yeah.
That's kind of Shoshone Falls. Here's a mining town like Silver City, and there's an old cemetery up there. Yeah? Yeah, I think there's, like a golden eagle, there's a farm there, there's a Mormon church in the background, a Mormon temple. Here's Cataldo Mission, which is the oldest building in the state.
Oh, there's a fish.
Yeah, there's a fish jumping in the waterfall. Yeah, good point. So, and here's the other side, you can see the mountains more. I think those are supposed to be the Seven Devils Mountains. What else do you see?
I see a guy dumping water.
Yeah, so that's a gold miner. He's looking for gold in the sand in the river. There's a dam there and a river barge. Here's this thing here is called the Idaho National Laboratory, where they started atomic power back in the 30s and 40s. Atomic, it's very complicated.
Like an atomic bomb.
And then what about anybody recognize this thing? Balanced rock. I think I heard somebody say, yeah, that's a famous rock over by Twin Falls that we've hiked up to. There's a moose. These are Native American petroglyphs, which are like drawings. If you go out to Nampa, out by the Snake River, there's a bunch of those on rocks out there. And here's one more up there, that green hill with the white lines on it. What do you think that is? What kind of mountain? Leo? No? It's a ski mountain. That's Sun Valley. So he just kind of had to decide all this stuff on his own. Like, what am I going to put on here? I'll put these sort of things that spoke to me. So it was only up for one night. They put it up for this party for one night, and then they gave it back to him, and then it went into his studio and his garage for like 30 years. And then about 15 years ago, I got it out, and we did a show at a museum downtown, and it hung there for about 6 months. So to kind of return to this idea of what it means to be a working artist. These are all things that he did for doing it as a job, and he was able to actually have it be his job for like 30 years. But being a working artist, hopefully, also means making art just because you enjoy it, right? You guys, I hope, are making art primarily because you enjoy it right now. Nobody here is a working artist yet. But he would go out and do it for fun too. So he would take this is called an easel that he was painting on. He had a traveling easel that was a little wooden suitcase, and he would take it with him in his car everywhere he went. This is a picture that I took of him when he was up in Placerville, because he really liked to paint old cemeteries and buildings up there. And he would just go around doing paintings and hang them in his own house or sell them or give them to his friends. Anybody know where this is? No?
Twin Falls?
No, not Twin Falls.
It looks like the gas station.
Not a gas station, no.
Hold on, we can't hear him. Someone was called and we can't hear him. Okay, say it again.
How did he get the watercolor?
It looks like pretty good, huh? Yeah. He just he had a really good sense of color, and he knew how to mix colors, right? Like there's not a tube of paint that says Julia Davis Lake Blue. You kind of have to look at it and know, like, I'm going to put some blue in here, put a little green in there, I'm going to put a little black into it, I'll put a little bit more green into it, or a little yellow into it. So this is down in Julia Davis Park, where they have a pond with paddle boats down there now, right by the zoo. This is still there, it just looks a lot different now. But he was just driving along in his car and saw this and said, you know what, that's pretty, I'm going to paint that. This is just along the road. He did a lot of these that he would just call along the road, because he would be driving along, he'd see something that he kind of liked and stop and get out. This one is not paint, it's actually oil pastels, like kind of like colored charcoal.
Yes, that's what we use in art. That would be hard.
It's not easy for sure.
Oil
Yeah.
pastels are hard to work with.
He really liked things that are hard to work with, but you can kind of see, like, look at the purple in there. Like, he really liked to put a lot of color in things and mix in some colors that maybe you didn't expect to see in there. Yeah?
I'm working on a portrait of my brother. I haven't even finished it.
Yeah.
I worked on it since like a week ago.
It's tough. It's tough. I know some of the portraits over here were in watercolor, right? Which is really tough to make a portrait in watercolor. He loved doing portraits in watercolor, which I think is so hard. Here's another one. This is painted. He was just up with his friend on a little vacation in Yellow Pine, Idaho, which is a little mining town up there. And he said, you know what? I'm going to bring my paints with me and just draw for fun. And he saw something he liked and he stopped it out. I like this one because it's this old house that's collapsing right into the forest.
Yeah.
But he didn't always travel around too. Like this looks like a jungle, but yeah, it's just a Boise River. So he just walked down from his house down to the Boise River when it was beautiful fall time and said, you know what, I'm just gonna make this, but I'm gonna do it the colors that I want. I'm not necessarily gonna do the colors that are there. I'm gonna have fun with it.
Whoa. That's gorgeous.
Any ideas where that is?
Cool.
Somebody said Stanley. Yeah, so these are the Sawtooth Mountains.
Little red fish.
Yeah, little red. Exactly. This is a little redfish lake, right?
I know that place.
Yeah, and that's again watercolor. Look at how hard it is to get the detail in those trees and the watercolor. That was on a really, really small piece of paper that's only like this big too.
You made one of those splatters. This is where it is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like you can kind of feel the wind blowing through the grass and the tree leaves there a little bit. So, after all of that, like, what do you think it means to be an artist as your job? What do you think?
Where he made that giant picture where it was 10 feet by
35? Yeah.
On the other side, I saw a moose.
There was definitely a moose there. Yeah. So one big thing about being an artist is being patient, right? So this guy was patient his whole life. There were 10 years where he didn't even get a single bit of work, but he kept being patient, kept practicing, and always learning. Right? It's really easy to be good at something and think like, okay, I'm good at it. I don't have to do it anymore. I don't have to get any better at it. But because he was good at something, he practiced it even more, which is kind of hard to convince yourself to do sometimes. But that's how you get really, really good at something. Where do artists get their ideas? Let's see, who have I not talked to so far?
Me.
I don't think I've heard from you.
From nature and other.
And inspiration.
Yeah, inspiration. Yeah, inspiration can come from any place. Nature is a big one. It can be just all around you too. It can be your life, people you know, the places you live. One of his favorite things to do was to just walk out the back door of his house and paint the scene there. I remember the stories my grandmother told him, like, hey, we need some artwork for over the fireplace. So he went out in the back and painted it. And that piece was the one that's on the cover of this book that I wrote about him a few years ago before he died. So this was the view from his back door, and this painting was hanging over the fireplace throughout my whole childhood. And then another big question is, like, where is there art in our lives that we didn't realize someone created? Like when you're talking about Frida Kahlo, you're talking about Leonardo da Vinci, you know that they created it because it's in a book, your teacher's teaching you about it, it's in a museum. But where in our lives is there artwork that maybe we didn't even realize that somebody made?
I didn't have a question.
Okay. Yeah? Everywhere. Exactly. Advertisements, posters, logos on like a football team's helmet or even a baseball team where it just is like a letter or a picture of a bird. Somebody had to create that stuff. Portraits. I was at a concert at the Morrison Center last week, and there's a huge portrait on the wall of Velma Morrison, and it's named. Murals on some of the buildings downtown. There's a lot of murals in Boise these days. Books like this, magazines, websites. What about power boxes? Have you guys seen those power boxes downtown with artists on them? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So that's just a little bit. That's a little bit of where you can actually see artwork all around you. So that's John Collias' story. Anybody have any questions for me? Yeah.
So,